Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first in a four-part series sponsored by PJ Library and PJ Our Way. This is a series for authors and aspiring authors. My name is Carla Nomberg, and on behalf of PJ Library and PJ Our Way, I am delighted to welcome you all to this first conversation in our four-part series. Today, we are so fortunate to welcome four incredible women who are all authors of PJ Library and/or PJ Our Way books, and they're here to share their experience, insight, and wisdom regarding how to break through to the other side and become a published author. First, I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Aroesti. Sarah is a Ladino singer, songwriter, and author. Drawing upon her Sephardic family roots from Macedonia and Greece via medieval Spain, Aroesti has worked for decades bringing Judeo-Spanish culture to a new generation through her 5 music albums, including Hora de Despertar, and which was the first ever all original Ladino children's recording. She also writes Sephardic themed books for kids, including her PJ Library book, Buen Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. You can learn more about Sarah at her website, saraharoesti.com, and follow her on social media at Sarah Aroesti. Hi, Sarah, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Next, I am delighted to introduce Rabbi Leah Berkowitz. Rabbi Berkowitz is the spiritual leader of Congregation Kol Ami in Elkin Park, Pennsylvania. She is the co-president of the Women's Rabbinic Network and was a contributor to The Sacred Calling, 4 Decades of Women in the Rabbinate, which was a National Jewish Book Award winner. Sarah is also the author of 2 PJ Library books, The World Needs Beautiful Things and Queen Vashti's Comfy Pants. You can find Leah on social media at Rabbi LRB or online at leahrachelberkowitz.com. Up next, we have Ilana Rubinstein. Ilana is the author of the Sarah Lee Siegel books, a chapter book series for children ages 7 to 10. Her first book, Once Upon an Apple Cake, was a National Jewish Book Award finalist and a PJ Library selection. Her second book, Starlight Soup, will hit the shelves this coming August, and she's got a third one on the way in October of 2022. You can learn more about Ilana at ilanarubenstein.com, or on Instagram, she's at Ilana Rubinstein. Very handy when all the accounts line up. Finally, I am delighted to introduce our moderator for this panel, Erica Pearl. Erica is the author of over 30 popular and critically acclaimed books for young readers, including PJ Library titles The Ninth Night of Hanukkah, which is brand new. It just came out this Hanukkah, if I'm not mistaken, and Best Buds Forever, as well as PJ Our Way reader favorites, When Life Gives You OJ and Aces Wild. Erica is also the author of the middle grade novel All Three Stooges, which won the National Jewish Book Award and a Sidney Taylor Honor Book. Erica draws and posts her cartoons on Instagram at ESP Scroll. So thank you all for joining us. And Erica, I'm happy to turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you, Carla. And thank you, PJ, for welcoming me and our esteemed panelists to do this today. I'm very excited. So I have to say that I think this is actually the hardest time in an author's life, when you're in that pre-published stage. I think it is just, there's so many mysteries out there, and I wish there had been a panel like this when I was getting started, because demystifying is the best thing for those of you who are at the beginning of this road. But I just want to say you've done one of the hardest things, which is just showing up and being here. So I want a round of applause for you guys for being here, and I hope that we can be of use to you, because you are really what we're here to serve you. So we'll get to your questions in a little bit. I'll start out with some questions that we've gathered, and like I said, we'll do whatever we can to be an open book and hopefully open your books or open the doors to your book. Okay, let me kick it off by asking a question, and I'm going to actually start off with Sarah. And so my first question is, and then we'll go around round robin. What are some of the specific activities that helped you overcome hurdles in just the processes of getting started writing, and started like sharing your stories? How did you get over those hurdles at the very, very beginning?
So I think every person when they're starting out doesn't really believe that they're a real writer. And so I always considered myself a musician first and foremost. I'm a songwriter, and I never even imagined I would write a book. I was so used to writing songs. And when the idea came to me to turn one of my songs into a book, I thought, well, it works great as a song. I'm not so sure about the book. And I think one of the big hurdles was just understanding that I could be a writer too, a writer of books and not just of songs. So that was the first step. And then turning a song into a book is a whole other step, which had a process, and it was not the same as the song. My PJ Library book, Buen Shabbat Shabbat Shalom, originated as a song, but it was adapted for a book. So that had some hurdles. So for all the songwriters out there and the poets, if you're thinking about writing a book, there are some tweaks and changes you'll likely have to make, but it is possible. And for me, I take my phone wherever I go, and every time I have an idea, whether it's for a song or for a book, I make sure to use my voice memo. And I'm that crazy person walking down the street. Every time an idea hits me, I record it in my voice memo, and all those ideas get stored up. And when I have free time, I turn back to it, and I am a writer, right? That's what we have to keep on telling ourselves, is no matter what your background is, what your day job is, you are a writer. If you have ideas and you can put some of them on paper, you are a writer.
Love it. Love it. I love that there are two tangible things that we just got out of from the very get-go. Grabbing that confidence and claiming your space, and also writing stuff down, even little things, even if you don't have paper, that makes a difference. Leah, do you want to jump in and add?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I actually have always identified as a writer, but not necessarily as a children's book author. I've done a lot of writing in my work as a rabbi, and also separate from that. So I was always somebody who really benefited from writing classes, especially classes, and I was fortunate to be part of one of these for many years when I lived in North Carolina, classes where you could just sit and somebody would give you prompts and just be sort of in a space where you could write. I think the hardest thing for me is, without that kind of accountability or without that kind of community, forcing myself to sit down and do that on a regular basis. So that was a big part of it. Is having a writing community and having a space and time set aside to write. And yeah, and then as far as with children's books, I actually wrote my first children's book as a story to tell on the pulpit. So I had been doing that a lot, and I've been doing a lot of writing, storytelling in that regard. So somebody told me that it might make a good children's book. So I did the usual rabbinic / nerdy thing that I would do, is I looked up books on how to write a children's book. And I think the book that I read was called It's a Bunny Eat Bunny World. It is probably out of date now, but that and something like this panel would have helped me. And then also I talked to somebody I knew who wrote Jewish children's books to get her thoughts on things. So basically having community and guidance helped me to make the transition into children's books.
That's great. Ilana, you want to jump in?
Sure. So for me, I know that a major hurdle was perfectionism. So like even as a child, people like I loved to write, and people would give me notebooks, to write my stories in. And if I didn't like what I was writing, I would just like rip it out. And so, I just had a lot of up notebooks as a kid. And at a certain point I realized, I'm just sabotaging myself. And, if I really want to feel creative and feel like a writer, I have to finish what I start, and I have to allow myself to have bad ideas and not be okay with everything and not judge myself so harshly. And yeah, it's really hard even now. I still, like when I write something, my first instinct is to go back and edit it a gazillion times. But now I know, like, I just have to finish the first draft, and then I can go back and edit it to my heart's delight. But when I'm just in the idea stage, I try not to be too overly critical, because that held me back for so long.
I think that's a great point. I hope others are feeling the same way I am. I relate to so much of what you all are saying, because I, you know, as a kid, I had those notebooks. I actually, a lot of times if I were given a notebook and the notebook was too pretty, I wouldn't want to kind of mess it up with my stories, which is an impulse that I think is hilarious now, but, you know, at the time it made sense. And in terms of what you just said about revising, the idea of it being a sort of a separate time and part of your brain, letting things flow and then coming back later. Can you talk, Ilana, can you talk a little bit more about your revision process? And we'll just kind of taking, for example, let's go with Once Upon an Apple Cake and just kind of talk about how the revisions went from the first draft to the holding it in your hand as a book, a little summary, and then you guys can each do that.
Sure. The book got revised a lot. It started off with a completely different story about a magical restaurant, and that is not what the book is about. It's actually about a girl who has a magic super nose that lives in a restaurant. So I basically rewrote the story maybe 10 or 15 times. And what I would typically do is I would write things, and then I would go on my computer and I would put it, that little microphone function where it would read it to you. And I would just sit and I would listen to it. I would try to see if it felt right. I know that's not like a great specific tip, but if the plot was not moving the right way or the characters just didn't sound authentic, I would pause and I would be like, okay, what do I need to do? And it ended up getting rewritten a million gazillion times. And finally, you know, when it did get published, I was able to work with an amazing editor who helped me revise it the last time. And that was not a huge rewrite, but a major rewrite. And yeah, it was an amazing process and I really liked getting the feedback.
Leah, do you want to go next and jump in?
Sure. So I feel like I've learned a lot about revision recently because I'm working on a longer manuscript. And I used to just, you know, I would print things out, I'd cover them with the colored ink and then I'd go back into the document and move it around. And I realized that what's really helpful for me in revision is even if I'm typing exactly what was on the original page, to re-enter the next draft from scratch, because then you actually have to actually make a decision for every word. Am I still going to write that word that way? And a lot of times I do. But that does help in terms of, is this part absolutely necessary? Because a lot of my revision is actually cutting. I started out writing for adults and tend to write very, very long everything. And my congregants will attest to this in my sermons. For every sermon that I have given to them, there's about 10 minutes that I had to cut out. And they're already still a little bit longer than average. So I tend to generate a lot of ideas and then have to pare them down to what's essential. So that's a big part of the revision process, especially with picture books, because picture books are maybe only 500 to 800 words.
Sarah, what about you? Oops, you need to.
Revising is tough. Even with a board book, which when Shabbat Shalom is, I mean, every word counts, especially when you only have less than 100 words to make a point. So in my very unique case, I think because the book is somewhat bilingual, there are a lot of Ladino words in it. The first iteration had more Ladino than PJ Library thought would work for its audience. So part of that revision process was changing the language. And so that had its own unique challenges, but we worked together and we sort of met in the middle to make it work for everybody. And that has been really helpful moving forward, thinking about how language, especially when it's not English, for those of you who are incorporating bits of other languages, perhaps it is its own unique challenge, but it's a fun one.
That's great. I have a question for all of you that relates to, some of you have alluded to this in your comments so far, and I think it would be helpful for people to know kind of when PJ got involved. Although I think to a certain extent, if your case is a way that PJ worked that they don't work anymore, if you can explain that, that would be helpful, because PJ Library sits in a variety of different roles. And the main thing they do in terms of working with publishers is that they, you know, when they find a book that PJ likes, they commit to making it, to creating a print run with most publishers that they work with. And so what they do is they sort of sit as a special market purchaser, where they come in and say, we, PJ Library, serve a special market, and we want to make this book in a special edition that we want 20,000 copies of, or 10,000 copies of, or whatever the amount is for what particular piece of PJ they are serving. And so I'm curious as to when PJ got involved in each of your books and how that worked. So Leah, do you want to jump in first?
Yes. So my first book, The World Needs Beautiful Things, which is with Carbon. I was very new to this, and I see a lot of questions about agents. I did not have an agent. So I, you know, did all my revisions. I got it to a point where I was happy, at least a little bit happy with it, because, you know, some people are never satisfied with their own work. And then I sent it off to the Jewish publishing houses that I knew, and also to PJ Library at the same time. And in that case, this was not true with the second book. In that case, I actually heard from both of them on the same day. I don't know if they had talked to each other first. But
I'm sorry, both of the publishers, or
no,
both
I heard
PJ
from
and the
both,
publisher?
I heard from PJ Library and from Carbon, my publisher, on the
Got
same
it. Okay.
Whereas with the second book, I think I also submitted simultaneously, and then I heard first from PJ, and then PJ helped me make some connections. I know that some of that has changed now, but PJ got involved pretty early with both of my books.
Cool. Sarah, you want to jump in next?
Sure.
Same question.
Yeah, I submitted. I was not agented, and I really had no relationship with publishers whatsoever. So I submitted to PJ Library, and I believe they still do it. They have kind of sort of 3 categories. They either accept you, they don't accept you, or there's that other sort of middle category of, we love the idea, but maybe we can make some changes and you can resubmit. So originally I was in that 3rd category that, again, that language issue, I had to make some revisions to resubmit it. And once I did so, it was accepted. Again, I was unagented, and they helped me find a publisher. And so that was several years ago. So for all of you wondering, it is a really long process to get a book published. That's a whole other question we can answer. But from the moment I submitted to the time I got a book in my hand, I mean, it was over, I think, 2.5 years. So it takes a really, really long time. And just so you know, I am now agented, fast forward, and that doesn't necessarily help with PJ Library. You can really, if we panelists here are any indication, you can get your books published without an agent. Does it help? I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt having an agent, but I have since submitted other things to PJ Library that have not been accepted. So having an agent really doesn't make a difference in that case. So don't worry if you don't have an agent, is my point.
And what about you, Ilana?
Yeah, my story is very similar. I also submitted my book to PJ Library, only PJ Library. I didn't submit to any publishers. And I actually thought that I had been totally rejected because months went by and I was, oh man, they didn't like it. And then I actually did get an email that, you know, they wanted to speak with me on the phone. And I was in that 3rd category that Sarah was talking about. You know, they had me work with an editor to help me get the book into shape. And I loved that process. Just thought that was so fun. And I learned so much. You know, it was my first time feeling like, oh, you know, maybe I could be a professional at this. This is amazing. And then, yes, at PJ Library also helped me find a publisher. I know there's going to be another session on, you know, what that looks like. But yeah, it was a great experience. And I'm really just grateful that I had that chance to work with that first PJ Library editor, because it made a huge difference.
Yeah, and I will say, I'm going to give a little shout out, and it's in the comments as well, in the chat, that there is going to be a session that's behind the scenes with the PJ Our Way book selection committee and behind the scenes with the PJ Library book selection committee, because they're two different committees. And I think that would be really, really helpful for people just to hear what happens at those meetings, because there's a lot of, no spoilers here. You'll have to learn like everything there. But I will say that in my experience, it's helpful to know kind of what they are and are not looking for. It's also helpful to know how long the process takes and the reasons why. As Ilana just alluded to, it's not always because they didn't like your book. Sometimes it's a question of just the time it takes to get together, to get everyone on the same page, having read it, and to consider other, where there might be a hole in the schedule. So again, that's not my role. You can hear it from the horse's mouth there, but I do know that has certainly been my experience, that the wait can be long. And that usually when you do get to the point where you have a conversation about your book, if there is some interest in your book, that may not be the end of the story. There may be an iterative process that happens then that can be really helpful to making your book better. That's certainly been my experience as well. Okay, we did hear, I think Sarah mentioned how long the process can be just in the book world, not necessarily in PJ world. Can each of you just say very quickly kind of what your experience was, kind of timeline, start to finish? I think it's helpful for people to know. Ilana, do you want to just say that? I think we heard from Sarah on this, maybe Ilana and then Leah.
Sure. Well, mine took a really long time. So I wrote it my junior year of college, and I submitted it to PJ Library my senior year of college. I didn't hear back till like the very end of my senior year. And then the book sold pretty quickly. Then it didn't get published until 2 years later because my book was a holiday book, a fall holiday. And by the time they bought it, it was too late for the upcoming holiday cycle. So it had to wait another one. So yes, it was, I think, a total of like 4 or 5 years total.
Wow. Leah, can you top that? 6 or 7 years?
I think I can. So I'm trying to remember exactly how many years it was, but I wrote my first book as a story just to tell on the bima. On the pulpit at synagogue at a family service. And then I put it in a drawer and I forgot about it. And I know that it was at least 2 jobs later. So it might have, when I was using the story again, so it could have been as many as 5 years when I took it out of the drawer and I'm like, oh, I kind of like this. Maybe I'll share it with some people. And I shared it with some of my colleagues saying, oh, this would work for this week's Shabbat service if you have a family service. And somebody said, oh, you could publish this as a children's book. And from there, it was actually a little more straightforward, but it's still a long process. It took me a couple of months of revising it and sort of getting familiar with what it requires to write a children's book and submit a children's book. And then from when I heard from PJ and Carbon to when the book was in my hands was a little over 2 years. So even if it goes smoothly, I think the message is, even if it goes smoothly, even if it goes quickly, the book process takes 2 years, in part because of the packaging and the illustrations and the marketing and the schedule and all of that.
So based on everything you just said, I have a question for each of you, because I think that for when people are getting started out, it's sort of hard to decide when to hit send to submit something. Like, do you do it early on because it's going to take so long? Do you do it after you've done a couple of revisions and you feel like you've gotten it maybe as far as you can go and it might not be right yet, but you're sort of ready to move it off your desk? Or do you hang on to it like until it is absolutely like, this thing sings before you hit submit? What's your take on that? Leah, you start off.
I mean, ideally, if you can get to the point where then that is a great time to send it off. I think that you definitely don't want to send your first drafts to a publisher just for their opinion. That's kind of, I feel like that's not the best use of everybody's time. So what you want to do is you want to show it to some other people that might have a valued opinion, especially if you're writing picture books. If you know any children, so for Queen Vashti's Comfy Pants, I sent it to all my friends' kids who were like right in that age group and got their feedback on it, and then sent it to some writer friends who might have different feedback. And I think from there I was able to say, like, this is as far as I can get it. I understand that it's going to change in the process. Because you don't want to be too attached to exactly how it is when you send it in, because it's going to change. So yeah, so I got it as far as I could get it before I sent it in.
What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, All of that is so true. So I think my process has changed. I was really green when I started out trying to write children's books a few years ago. I really didn't know what I was doing. So rest assured, if you're watching this, it's okay. So I tried a very different strategy back then than I probably do now, which is to say, like, I threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. That is not necessarily what I would suggest, but
when you say the wall, do you mean you submitted everything, like to PJ, or
a lot of things that I'm like mortified that I did now? But you know what? I'm glad I did it because now I know what not to do. But you know, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I actually followed some of what Leah said. I have 2 kids exactly in the correct age group, and I would run everything by them. I have a critique group now, which I guess I didn't at the time, but I cannot recommend critique groups enough. They are wonderful. Even if you don't have a critique group, have just trusted people. I would definitely recommend trusted authors and also non-authors to read. You just need another pair of eyes because we get so attached to what we write, and you need that that other perspective. So definitely have readers before you submit. But when I was starting out, I did most of that, but I wasn't really sure, you know, my intention for writing. I knew I wanted to write, but I wasn't really clear yet in my head about who my audience was going to be, what my goals for writing were. I kind of just wrote everything down from my voice memos from my phone, and I just kind of wanted to see what would turn out well. And I submitted far too many things than I should have. And, you know, they weren't accepted, rightfully so. And now I feel like over the past couple of years, through the publication process, I have a much better idea of the writer that I want to be and of the content I want to produce and the audience I want to write for, which has helped me slow down a bit, because you really need to take that deep breath and not press submit right away. You really need to be patient, I think. So now I'm much more cautious, and I feel much more vested in my writing to the point where I have things that have been sitting in my inbox for months and months and months that I have not even shown my agent yet because I'm just, I'm so attached to them. And I know that through the process, like the other panelists have said, things change. You could go through 10 revisions and all of a sudden your story is not the one that you set out to write. And that's somewhat terrifying. And it is really vulnerable. So now that I feel like I know what I'm doing more, I'm actually much more cautious and slower.
And Ilana, what about you? I think you said that there was a year in between.
Yeah. So for me, I knew I was ready to submit it, like when the story felt alive, so to speak. Because when I wrote the first draft of the book, the characters were like, okay, but they didn't feel real. And like the setting was fun, but like it didn't feel like a real place. And just something in the book wasn't working. It didn't have that zing. And I edited it like for that full year. I rewrote it. And I finally made the change of moving the book from a magic setting to a magic girl. And that one little difference just made the full book feel alive. I remember I think I was like at Panera and I wrote a scene. I think it was like the first scene, and I finished it and I was like, okay, that's alive. Like the other stuff that I wrote, that was not true writing from me. Like, this is what I want to say. And it was just a difference of feeling. And I knew when I was done with that I could submit it. And yes, like that got revised a lot, from editors and things like that. But the core remained the same, and that core was alive. So that's how I knew I was ready to submit it.
I love that description of it, because you really do have to wait for that moment where all of a sudden it's like, yes, like I've cracked that code, I've figured that thing out, or I've tried something new that I didn't think would work, and it did. That's great. You guys have mentioned, a bunch of you have mentioned the idea of getting feedback and working with critique partners and stuff. Can you speak about kind of how you found good people to get feedback from and what that process looks like? Because I personally have found it to be incredibly helpful. Even at times where I think something's really in good shape, I often find that when I get the feedback of my critique partners, I see things I didn't see, and I notice things and get additional perspectives that can strengthen it. So can you guys each talk about that? Let's see, who hasn't gone first? Well, raise your hand. Who wants to go first? We'll throw it out there. I'm right. I'm going to have to pick on you. Okay, Leah, go for it.
I wanted to just build a little bit on what Ilana said, in that don't put too much pressure on yourself about the feeling alive, because it makes it hard to just sit down and write. And there's going to be a lot of days that it doesn't feel alive, and you actually have to go through those to get to where you're going. And it's really hard, because once you have that feeling, if you write something and you don't have that feeling, you can be really hard on yourself. It can be hard to know when something's ready. And that is where critique and feedback comes in, because what's really helpful is when you can find somebody where you can ask a question, you're like, something's not right here, and I don't know, like right here, I don't know what to do. If you can ask specific questions about what you're trying to fix, that can be really helpful. I have a couple of people, I don't think there's any sort of I don't have a formal critique group now, but I happen to have people in my life who either have children, teach children, or write for children. So if I have a question and I think that they could help me, I just email it to them and they send me some notes. And I actually also found out that now that I have relationships with editors and with PJ Library, I've actually gotten a lot of really helpful feedback from people there when I've submitted things. And Sarah, I did want to say, I did throw a lot of stuff at the wall in addition to the ones that I refined a lot. Because once I found out that something I told on the pulpit on a Friday night was PJ worthy, I sent them all my Friday night stories, most of which were not PJ material. So yeah, the magic doesn't always happen, but you have to keep at it to get to the magic.
Very good advice, definitely. Sarah, you want to say your take on critique partners and where you find them?
Sure. I have a couple. So the first group I joined, first it was very informal. I would use my own children and my nephews and close friends with kids. And that was great. That was very, very helpful to get me one step forward. But I felt like I really needed advice and critiques from actual writers. So I found my first critique group through SCBWI. If you're not familiar with them, you should be. The Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. It's not a great acronym, SCBWI, but they have been enormously helpful. There are so many resources, and you can find critique groups in your region if you go on the website. So I originally found my critique group through SCBWI. Since then, another thing I would recommend if you're looking for community, if you're just starting this writer journey, finding community is really important just for your own confidence and networking and friendship building. And there are wonderful, wonderful resources and conferences. First of all, PJ Library offers events and webinars like this, but also they often have conferences, and they have a special relationship now with Highlights Foundation. And Highlights is a wonderful, wonderful organization that has workshops and seminars. And I recently attended one for Jewish children's writers, and I have two other critique groups now through that. So the more, I probably have too many chefs in the kitchen right now.
If you need a critique group, Sarah has extras, so she can share.
Well, and Sarah, I just want to add, I just spent the weekend at the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center, and it wasn't a conference. It was they aren't doing them right now because of COVID, but they are you can rent a cabin, and they will cook all your meals for you, and you can just sit there and write all day and be around other writers. So that's all. So for people who maybe have a hard time getting stuff done when you're in your normal environment, being just a change of scenery can really help. And they do have a lot of incredible resources for writers.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna ask if one of the PJ people can put in the chat SCBWI's information and the Highlights information. That would be super helpful. I like to refer to SCBWI as Squibwy myself. I'm going to start kind of lightning rounding this just because I want to make sure we get to a lot of topics, and I want to leave 15 minutes at the end for additional questions to come in. So my next question, I'm going to jump in for Ilana to take this one, and then we'll go around maybe to like one more person and we'll just keep bouncing. Rejection. How do you deal with rejection? Rejection, in my experience, continues to be a part of the process. I have whatever, 30 something books out there and I still get rejected. So how do you handle it?
I think just knowing that rejection, like you said, it's just part of it. Nobody is like a golden idea wizard. Like we're all gonna have good ideas, we're gonna have ideas that don't work. And for me, I write a series. And so, you know, I work with my editor and, you know, I keep submitting ideas for the next book in the series to her. And I'll be honest, a lot of them have been rejected. And I just try to not take it personally. Just know that the good idea, it will come. I just try to have trust that it'll happen. And actually working collaboratively with my editor has been really great, knowing that, you know, she's on my team and she wants me to have another book in the series. And, you know, I just have to get to that idea that really pushes me to the next level, and, you know, just have trust and faith that that idea will pop in when it's ready.
That's awesome. What about you, Leah? You got any strategies?
Well, this actually started when I was writing things not for children, like short stories, essays, things like that. I heard from somewhere that some writer had wallpapered their room with their rejection letters. And I didn't do that, but I did start keeping them, and particularly keeping them when they're helpful, because sometimes they are. Especially when it's not a form letter. So I've gotten ones that were like, this was great, it's just not what we're looking for. And I treasure those a lot. And then I've gotten ones that say, you know, things like, we don't take stories about angels, or this rhyme scheme doesn't work, but we like the concept. Like these are all, or this might work for older children, it doesn't work for our age group. So I always try in my writing life and my other life to separate the helpful feedback from the feeling of rejection. Not easy, but it's doable.
That's really important. I think particularly, you know, that, you know, it's not personal. It might not be for them. It might be for someone else, and it might not be for them now. And there's lots of ways to look at it. And it still hurts. Yeah. It still hurts, but it can also sometimes lead to a yes down the road. Yeah. Sarah, you can feel free to throw in anything you have on rejection, but I'm also going to shift into the balance question. Okay. How do you guys balance everything else that is going on in your life while also, you know, writing books? I'm excited for when we get to Ilana, who I think is doing 16 different things simultaneously. She may be teaching a group of children right now. But okay, but Sarah, you kick it off.
Sure. First of all, about rejection, it just takes one yes. Just remember that you could get 30 rejections, but if you find that one yes, you're okay. So, I mean, that has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to many other people. My most recent book that's coming out, PJ Library did not accept, but somebody else did. So it just takes one yes. And what Leah said was right on point. There might be so many reasons why someone rejects a book, and it is not necessarily tied to your story or your idea or your creativity or your writing. It could have a completely other reason. So it is a really hard balance to try to maintain some distance from your words and your manuscript, and not to take everything so personally. And you just got to keep on going. You got to just keep on writing. You cannot stop. Keep at it. Work-life balance, so hard. It's impossible. I mean, I have 2 kids, ages 5 and 7. I homeschooled them this whole past year. They just went back to school a week ago. And so, yes. But yeah, finding that time. I'm not a night person. I wake up early. So if I can grab that hour in the morning for myself, that's what I'll do. But you just have to carve out that time wherever you can find it. And if you can't find the time, take a notebook, take your voice memo, record those ideas so that when you do have time, you can go back to them.
Great advice. Leah, you want to say your work-life balance?
Sure. Well, it's funny because I think the question that we'd gotten in advance was, how do you balance it with your day job? Well, I'm a rabbi, and I think like many jobs now, that is not a day job. That is an all the time job. So what's good is that there's a lot of convergence between what I do at work and what I write about. So sometimes one thing feeds the other. So, but this will be a good illustration of my balance, is that my second book, Queen Vashti's Comfy Pants, I actually wrote the day after the Purim spiel, which I had also written. So I think I was already sort of thinking in rhyme, but I woke up thinking of part of it and I didn't want to forget it. So I actually wrote it with my thumbs on my phone while still in bed. Not the whole thing, but like a really good chunk of it. And that's sort of how it has to happen. So we can't be too precious about our time. It's great to carve out that kind of time when you can, like to go to a retreat or to take a class, and that helps you generate material or finish projects. But you also have to just take it when it comes. And I also want to say right now I'm working on a longer project, and that is harder to find time for, because a children's book, you know, the total hours you're going to spend on it before you show it to somebody is probably going to be less than a chapter book. So for this book, when I was sort of doing my New Year's resolutions, I decided I needed to figure out a reasonable amount of time that I could spend on the project each week. And it's a lot less than I thought was going to be helpful. So I actually said, I'm going to write 3 hours a week. It doesn't matter which hours, what days, but I'm going to go for a total of 3 hours. And I have to say, I mean, it's only the first draft, but I've gotten the majority of my part of this manuscript done on 3 hours a week, and also this weekend at the Highlights Foundation. So where I think I did like at least 3 hours a day. But I would have told you I needed to do 3 hours a day to write a book, or an hour a day to write a book. And, you know, it takes as long as it takes. I'm lucky that I'm lucky that I don't have to be cranking out a book every couple of months as my living. So I can go at a slower pace.
That's wonderful. I love the idea. Just set a criteria, whatever it is. 3 hours a week, 3 hours a month, 3 hours anywhere you can find it.
If you're doing picture books, you could set aside 1 hour a week. And because, you know, if you get the right idea, it could take just an hour, like an hour of thinking, an hour of you know, writing word clouds or whatever.
Yeah. Turning other things off.
Yeah.
So that you can just focus on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ilana, I'd love your answer on that. Let me just really quickly answer a question that's in the chat, because I don't want to forget about it, which is a lot of people have been wondering about whether illustrations need to be submitted with stories. And I just want to say categorically no. If you are an illustrator or a graphic novelist or something, and it is a part of your work, that's a different story. But if you are a writer and your write is going to be illustrated, that is not anything you have to worry about. You worry about the words, and you submit it to PJ just as the words, and you submit it to publishers actually just as the words. The obligation to get an illustrator involved is not yours. That comes along later when the publisher will suggest illustrators and pair you with an illustrator and work with you, and PJ may be involved in that part of the process, but that's not something you have to worry about at this stage of the game at all. Ilana, work-life balance, and then we're going to really quickly segment to one last question before we throw it open to new questions.
Sure. So my life is crazy. I teach full-time. I teach pre-K, which I love and adore, but it is very tiring. And I also go to grad school at night. So I have homework and assignments and group projects and just crazy things. So for me, it's just really important to me that the writing does not feel like a chore. I still want to be playful, and I still want to have fun, and I want it to be like something in my life that I can look forward to and that feels good to me. So if I'm not feeling it, I don't typically write. And sometimes what I'll do, I write chapter books. So, you know, I do have to put in some serious hours into it, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, okay, Sunday, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write all day, and I'm going to try to make it like a special time just for writing. And doing that really helps me. But again, like if I get home from work and I am like grumpy, in a bad mood, you know, in a sugar low, need caffeine, I'll have to wait until I'm in a better mood to write.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to hold my one last question for the very, very end. Let me throw it over and answer questions that have come in. Can my wonderful PJ support team give me some questions? I'm going to look for them. Okay. So one question that we got has to do with balancing history and telling a story when writing Jewish children's books. What kind of research do you do? And how much do you try to stick to the facts versus telling the story you want to tell? And I think just to expand on that question a little bit, because sometimes this has to do with history, but sometimes it has to do with cultural context. Sometimes it has to do with writing a fictional story that's grounded in a reality. So I think this does tie into everyone's work. So can you guys talk about your research and how you balance the parts that are fictional versus the parts that are non-fictional in your work? Leah, do you want to start?
Sure. So I write what is called midrash, which are stories about stories in the Bible. So I want to be familiar with the biblical story, but then I'm also going to depart from it. So I think probably the research might come in more in the illustrations of making sure the illustrator has to be sure that nothing in the pictures is anachronistic. Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's mostly just reading the biblical story, maybe looking at a few other takes on it. And also I like to do a little research just to make sure that nobody else has done it yet. Because there's only so many stories about, we definitely need more feminist Purim stories, but there's only so many that we can put out in the world at a time.
Excellent. Sarah, what about you?
It's a great question. I write now primarily from a Sephardic viewpoint. And so I'm well aware that the Sephardic customs and stories are not as familiar to many audiences. And so I have to be really careful, and it's really hard. And I haven't quite cracked that code about how to balance, wanting to share that culture with people, but also putting it in a lovely creative story. That's a challenge, but that's part of the fun of writing, figuring out how to do that. You don't want to be too didactic, right? But you also don't want to, sugarcoat and wash out the amazing specificities and unique properties of the stories that we're trying to tell. That's a challenge. I'm currently working on a really exciting picture book biography, and that has its own challenge in terms of research, especially if it is a person or a character that there aren't a lot of primary sources for. So that's a whole other category about how to sort of fictionalize historical subjects. For me, research is critical, and you have the option, hopefully, of writing really, really good back matter so that you don't have to dump everything. You don't want to be too didactic. You want to concentrate on the storytelling. And so, you can save a lot of the research for the back matter, which people can really geek out on. But I would say concentrate on the story you want to tell first, but make sure that it's accurate.
That's a really good point. And for those who don't know, back matter is what goes in the back of the book, hence the name, which can be nonfiction details that either support in some way the story that you're telling, or tell additional, kind of richnesses to the story or the context of the story. Sometimes you'll put a bibliography there, or additional resources that might be for, if you want to read more about this topic. So all of that stuff that maybe doesn't quite fit into the body of the story itself can go in the back matter. And publishers love back matter. They love it because educational settings where books can be used in addition to homes are great places for teachers to use it as a jumping off place, or media specialists. And also families love it because if you have a kid who really dives into a book, you want to know where to find other books on that topic. So back matter is a great thing to create when you're working on a book. Okay, I'm going to jump to a new question because we have a lot of wonderful questions coming in. One question is about determining the target age and kind of figuring out how your book fits in the spectrum of books that are out there. And this question also asks about finding a publisher, finding an illustrator, and all these different things. And I think that some of that will come from, when you figure out where your story fits, then you can find out more about where to submit it. In my experience, one of the things that's most helpful in terms of determining the target age of a book and how many words it should be is learning and looking at other books that are out there, really doing your homework and reading a lot of different kinds of books and figuring out, okay, my book is this kind of a book. So if I know that I'm writing an illustrated chapter book, I'm going to look at how many words there are per chapter. I'm going to look at how many chapters there are per, per book. Is it a series book? If I'm writing a picture book, it's a very different thing. And so figuring out kind of, my book is going to be like this kind of book, can help you figure out what the target age is for your book, how many words. And then at that point, you can say, who's publishing this kind of book, and go to those publishers. We had another question that came in from a boy named Ethan, who is 11 years old. Thanks for joining us today, Ethan. Let's hear your question. Your question is, I self-published 2 graphic novels on Amazon, and I want to know how to get noticed by publishers. Ethan, you are not alone in this. How do I get a book in Barnes & Noble? Okay, so I'm going to throw this, I'm going to answer this quickly myself, and then I'll throw it to others if anyone else has any other suggestions for kids who are writing and want to find a wider audience. I think it's amazing that you self-published 2 graphic novels and that they're on Amazon. I'm going to have to go look for your books, Ethan. That's super cool. Graphic novels are also a lot of work and in high demand, so way to go. I think it's, in terms of getting noticed by publishers in general, I mean, our experience, I think, has been to submit to publishers, and showing publishers what you've done as a self-published author can sometimes lead the way to getting a publisher to want to publish a new edition of that book or a new book by you. So I think your track record that you've already created is a great way to show publishers what you're capable of. So when you do submit something to publishers, you can point them to Amazon and show what you've done so far, and they may be pretty excited. Ilana, do you have anything you want to add to that? Especially because you don't write graphic novels, but you do write illustrated books that are in that age range.
Yes. I would just say read a lot of the books that you like admire. It sounds like you really love graphic novels. Just keep reading those graphic novels and make lists of, your favorite things that your favorite authors do, like your top 10 favorite characters, your top 10 favorite villains, your top 10 twists, and see if you can just be inspired by what your favorite authors do and just keep working.
And I just want to add, if you are an 11-year-old writer/artist, you might really like the URJ's Creative Arts Academy, which is a Jewish summer camp in the Philadelphia area, though it's a national camp, anybody can go, where you can major in either visual art or creative writing or any other number of things. So I actually go there as faculty in the writing program for 2 weeks every summer, and it's been wonderful for me as a writer, and most of the other people in the class are amazing writers like you. So people who are writing books at 11, which I'm just really impressed by that.
Yeah, and I don't know, Ethan, whether you've submitted your work to PJ, but you might want to think about doing that. PJ Library and PJ Our Way are both interested in graphic novels, and so I would recommend that you submit and see what they have to say. There might be a conversation that would start that could go very nicely. We're being asked for a link to that camp in the chat, so Leah, if you can put that in the chat, that would be awesome. Someone already has. Somebody already has. I just asked for it. Can someone, deliver a pony to my house? I would like that. Okay, so additional questions that don't have to do with ponies, but have to do with writing books. I'm curious if the authors have written any non-Jewish books as well, and if so, was the process similar or different? I'll take that first, and then if people raise their hands, I'm happy to have other people chime in. I read a lot of what you might call non-Jewish books that have more of a secular focus. My Jewish book content is in about 5 or 6 books, and then my non-Jewish book content is everything else. And my process is not very different, except that I don't submit my non-Jewish books to PJ because my assumption usually is that they're not a fit. However, my understanding, and PJ people correct me if I'm wrong, is that kind of universal themes that might tie into Jewish values are also of interest to PJ. So sometimes I will submit a book that isn't an overtly Jewish book. Like, for example, I have a picture book that's coming out soon that's called When Carrot Met Cookie. It's about a carrot and a cookie and their friends. And it had friendship themes that I thought might have been of interest to PJ, or they might see something in it that I didn't think was there that's more Jewish than I realized. And so that's the kind of book that I wouldn't automatically think PJ, but I might submit anyway, just to see whether there was a fit possible. I'm hoping that the PJ people aren't like, no, please don't tell them that. But I actually think that they are interested in books that have broad themes that are related to Jewish values. That said, if you're writing books that are not Jewish books per se, and you don't think there's any chance that they're going to be a PJ book, you similarly just submit them to a publisher, or have an agent submit them to a publisher and go through the publication process separately from that. And while it is possible that PJ Library might find them and come to you, it would not be part of their process per se. I also want to point you to the chat, because there is a link about how PJ Library chooses books, which is, I think, is very helpful to have their guidelines out there. Okay, let me look for just a second at the chat and just see if there are any questions that I know there were a lot of really good questions. Oh, one question is, how important is an author website for a pre-published author in general and in regard to PJ? I mean, I'll tell you my take on it, and then I think everyone can just chime in quickly on this. I think that it's helpful. I don't think that you need to have an author website to prove that you're a real author. I don't think that's a requirement, but I do think that as you're building your universe, it's a nice thing to have, even if it's just as simple as a placeholder. Even if it just is like, this is who I am and this is what I do. And then there's room as you build to put your books up there, to talk about what you might do in a school visit, to add additional information and build it from there. So if it's something that is easy for you to do, and there are website building opportunities that are very straightforward and easy, put something up there. But in terms of having to prove that you have a huge web presence and following and everything in order to be taken seriously by PJ, that is not the case. And it's not the case with publishers either. I mean, certainly there are publishers who would be super excited if you showed up with 1 million followers in your back pocket. But if you have great writing, they really, really want that first and foremost. I see a lot of nodding. Yes, there is nodding. Anyone want to chime in on that also? Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Just, I think social media helps. I don't think it'll help you necessarily get published, but it will help you with getting whatever you're doing out into the world. Even if it's for Ethan, even if it's marketing your book on Amazon, just being able to, I don't know if you're on social media yet, don't rush into that. But if you're able to put it out places where people can access it, it helps you get to people that you maybe, if you don't have access to those bigger things, bigger ways of promoting your book, social media can be very helpful.
So great advice. I'm going to quickly answer a question which has to do with if you've submitted previously and been rejected in the past by a publisher, like, should you stop? And I think we're all going to chime in and say a resounding no, don't, because as I forget which one of you guys said it, but it was such great advice to say, like, it only takes one yes. And you can submit, and I do, books to a lot of different publishers who just don't see the fit for them, or it's just not what they do. And even you can submit, 10, 20 books to a single publisher. And if those are not fits, that doesn't mean that the 21st book is not going to be a fit. It might be. So please keep at it.
And I actually had a book, I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but I had a book get rejected and then have the publisher change their mind. I don't think this happens a lot, but they had like one very specific concern about it, and then realized that they talked to somebody else about it and realized that concern was not that important, and they came back. So clearly it's not cut and dry, like, oh, we have a list of people that aren't allowed in here anymore.
I love the story. They do not have a wanted poster on the wall. Do not let this person submit books, really. Because if they did, my picture would be on it.
Well, it's also writing, you're going to get better. So if you wrote something bad last year, that doesn't mean you can't write something that's going to lead to you hopefully writing something amazing later.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Okay, wait, very lightning round, because I know that we're wrapping this up, but I just wanted, if there's one piece of advice that you wish you got when you were pre-published, very quickly, one sentence, one piece of advice that you wish someone had like dropped into your life and said, this is the advice you need, what would it be? Sarah, you want to answer that one? I'm going to put you on the spot.
It's kind of a culmination of what everybody has said, like, just keep at it. You don't know what is around the corner. You could wake up tomorrow with the most brilliant idea. You could submit to 30 people and get rejections, but like Erica said, that 31st might be a yes. Like, just keep on going. There is no reason to stop because you just don't know what's next.
Okay. Ilana?
I would say just write things that give you joy and, light you up, because even if other people think that they're silly or stupid. If it gives you joy and it makes you feel so happy, that's what you're meant to write.
Awesome. Leah,
I almost
bring us home.
I almost don't want to follow that because that was perfect. I actually did get this advice from somebody at one of my writing retreats, and he said the only difference between the book on the shelf in the bookstore and the book that you have in your drawer is that you haven't finished it and sent it in yet. Because that book was once somebody's in the drawer thing.
It's so true.
So
it's so true.
Keep at it and finish what you start and show it to people.
I love
Thank
that.
you so much.
Get your tushy in the chair and keep writing, right, folks?
Tushy and chair. Good advice. Go, Carla.
I'm going to hop in here. I just want to say thank you so much to our amazing moderator, Erica Pearl, and our fabulous panelists, Sarah Arawesti, Ilana Rubinstein, and Rabbi Leah Berkowitz. This was a fantastic conversation. I know there were a lot of questions about PJ Library and PJ Our Way, so please look in the chat. We've got registration links for our upcoming conversations, including behind the scenes with the PJ Library Book Selection Committee on May 25th, behind the scenes with the PJ Our Way Book Selection Committee on June 29th. And then we're gonna switch tracks a little bit and dive deep into how to explore Midrash and Jewish texts as inspiration for children's books. And that's gonna be in July 20th. So you can register for all those conversations. The links are in the chat. And if you can't wait that long, please go to the PJ Library and PJ Our Way websites. It's pjlibrary.org and pjourway.org. Both pages, both websites have detailed information about what the program is looking for, how to submit, everything you need, and start reading the books. Really, as everyone said, the best way you can get a sense of what the children's book world is looking for and what PJ specifically is looking for is to really read the books that are out there. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and happy writing.